Hello, welcome to the Online Campus Writing Center's Introduction to 7th Edition APA Citations and References. My name is Gabrielle Lynch, and I am your writing specialist for the Online Campus Writing Center. This evening, we'll be reviewing some of the biggest changes between APA 6 and APA 7, as well as our different web resources that are designed to help you in this transition. The questions and chat box are on your GoToWebinar control panel. If at any point you have a question about the material, we have plenty of time this evening to take it slow and review the materials and the corresponding resources that we have on our website. So if you need any help at this time, you can raise your hand and we can try to troubleshoot with you. If not, we'll wait just a few seconds to let everybody else get acclimated as well. All right, let's get started. So this evening, I'll be sharing both a PowerPoint with you that you'll be able to access after this presentation, as well as the recording for our current webinar, and access our resources on our website. If you want to open up our website in addition to the present presentation, I'll show you how to do that real quick. Here showing on my screen is the new landing page for the Online Writing Center. The address can be found here, owlc-tcs.com. We'll be using this as well to review our new APA guides to help you during the transition. So if you want to pull that up as well, feel free. I'll also be showing it on the screen as we are discussing the changes. Okay, getting started. The first thing to know when deciding how to cite something in APA is what to cite. When you decide if you need a citation, you need to consider if you've used quotes. Anytime you use a direct quote, you have to include both quotation marks around the text that you've taken from the source and a parenthetical citation following that quote, or an inline citation introducing the quote in front of the quotation. So here in the orange, you can see Gray, 2015, para 4. This indicates to the reader where they can find this quoted material, giving the author proper credit. You also need to ask yourself if you've summarized a source in the source's material. If you have, you do also need to use a citation, even if you're using your own words. So here I've used an inline citation, Gray, 2015, noted students hesitate to take risks. And even when I don't use the author's name in the sentence, I use it in a parenthetical citation at the end of my summary here, which you can see when I say to be less important than their external measures of success. Parenthetical citation, Gray, 2015. So even though I've used my own words and not the source's words, I'm still going to use a citation to credit the original author's ideas. Finally, when you paraphrase a source, using words to share an idea from a smaller section of the source rather than the entire source, you will need to use an in-text citation as well. So you can see summary and paraphrase look very similar. Summary would be discussing the source overall as a whole, while a paraphrase might be a few sentences, 2 to 3, that you want to communicate to the reader in your own words. All three of these instances require a citation. I see we have a question, so I'm going to open that. If you start the sentence with saying Gray 2015, do you need, oh, I see the question disappeared. If you remove the question, the answer is no, you don't need a parenthetical citation at the end if you use the inline citation at the front. So looking at these examples here, I have gray 2015 starting this sentence in the first line of the summary. Because of that, I don't need to add the parenthetical citation at the end. You only need to cite once in the sentence requiring a citation. So now that we've decided what to cite, let's take a little look at how to do that. There are three main formats. The first is an in-text citation. You can use both a parenthetical citation or an inline citation like we just reviewed. So a parenthetical citation will appear typically at the end. Both the author or multiple authors and the year are contained inside of that citation. An inline citation means that you make the author of the citation part of the sentence itself. So here I've taken Marshall out and made Marshall the subject of my sentence. As you can see, the difference is I've also removed the comma. So when we have all of that information inside the same parentheses, we keep commas in between. However, if I take the author's name and I put it into the sentence, I no longer need that comma, so it can be removed. You also need a reference citation for every single source you use in your paper. So if you cite something in the body of your work, you're going to also need to have a reference citation in the reference list at the conclusion of the paper. Looking a little bit more in depth at these in-text citations, I'm going to show you after we review these how to access the same information using our interactive APA 7 tools found on the website, but we'll take a look at them here first. When you cite one author, the parenthetical citation will look like the author's last name, a comma, and the year. Moving the citation in line, you're going to take the author's last name, move it into the sentence, remove the comma, and keep the year in parentheses, directly following the author's last name. So this is important because if I use Sinatra's name as the subject of my sentence, I need to put that year right after instead of putting the year at the end of the sentence. So the parenthetical year should always follow the author's name very closely. If you have two authors, in the parenthetical citation, you'll use the ampersand, which is that fancy word for the and sign. So you'll have first name, ampersand, second name, comma, year. However, it changes a bit when we pull it in line. Instead of using the ampersand, if you pull the author's names into the sentence itself, you're going to transliterate that ampersand into the word and. So that's the major change here. If you have more than 3 authors, here's one of the newest features of APA 7. No longer will you list the 3 authors or up to 7 the first time. You'll immediately start using the shortened et al. Format if a source has 3 or more authors. So parenthetically, that looks like the last name of the first author, the abbreviation et al. Period, referring to all of the other authors, comma, and the year. When we pull it in line, we're going to retain that period at the end of et al., but again, we'll remove the comma. So in all of these citations, you can see that the comma is always removed if you take the author's names and pull them in line, even if you use et al. Some less common in-text citations that you might also run into in your coursework or dissertation. Personal communication. If you interview someone, you still need to include a citation explaining where you got the material from. To cite an interview, you'll use the initials and last name of the person that you interviewed. So here I have HR Marshall. This is the person who has been interviewed. Then comma, personal communication, comma, the date of the interview. When you move this in line, you only take the name of the interviewee and you leave the personal communication and the date in the parenthetical citation. Just like the other ones, that information has to immediately follow the name of the interviewee. So you can't have one part at the end of the sentence and one part at the beginning. I see there's a question, so one moment. Is this for interviewing study participants? So it'll be dependent on the kind of study that you're doing. So for example, if you have a methodology that primarily relies on interviewing someone, one person in particular, you might cite it this way. However, if you have a qualitative study where you've interviewed lots of study participants, you will not use this format. This format is more for singular case studies where you've spoken to one specific person about an issue, or let's say you needed to ask an expert in the field their opinion on the matter. It wouldn't be used for overall all the participants in your study. Yeah, Matthew, personal interviews. So for example, some of our coursework asks us to do things like interview a therapist in the field. And then we have to write a paper where we explain what that person said. This is the type of citation you would use for that interview. Okay, great. We'll keep going, and if you have any more questions about it as we go, we'll take care of them. Oh, I see one more. Christine wants to know, is the HR because this is a personal communication? No, the HR is the initials of the person that I interviewed. So that's their first and middle initial. So let's say, it's our director's name, Heidi, right? It starts with an H. So I have the first initial there, and then the middle initial, and then the last name. But other communication would not include the initials. Other citations do not include the initials. This is a special case. So this less common in-text citation is pretty much the only one that specifically requires initials. And that's because, as you'll see when we get to the reference list, you don't include personal communication in the reference list. So this is the only chance that the reader has to get familiar with this citation. They won't be able to scroll down to the reference list and find it. It's only going to be right here. You should use as many initials as they have. So if they've provided you with their first and middle name, go ahead and use both. If you've only been provided their first name, that's okay. If they have two middle names, I guess you'd have three. So as many initials as the person you've interviewed has shared with you. Essentially, you want it to be as specific as possible, since this is the only citation that you'll use to refer to interviews in your paper. Another less common source is a secondary source. This is where you're reading through a journal article or another source and you see that the source you're reading has cited another source. That makes the source secondary to the one that you are presently reading. What this looks like is the secondary source, not the source you're reading, but the source cited in the source, Marshall, 2016, as cited in Cook 2018. So Cook 2018 is the actual source that you're presently reading, and Marshall 2016 is cited in Cook. You want to be careful about how often you use things like this. Typically, APA requires that you have read the material that you're citing. This is for academic honesty and also for ensuring that the source does in fact validate what you're saying it does. So secondary sources should be very sparingly used. For instance, something that I find can be helpful is if, for example, your source is citing a prime theorist, right? So your source is citing Skinner, for example, in behavioral analysis, or another older citation that might be difficult for you to find and that you haven't read, but you know is the prime theorist for the concept. That would be more okay to cite this way. But where possible, you should always be citing the primary source. When you move a secondary source in line, you only take the authors of the secondary source names. So I just moved Marshall over and I leave everything else the same. Our secondary sources I see only included if the primary source directly quoted another author, or is it for any secondary source, even if it's not a direct quotation? That's a good question, Christine. So it's for anything that the source you're reading is citing. So your source could paraphrase, right? It could direct quote, it could summarize. And if they're using a summary, paraphrase, or a quotation from another source, and you want to use that, that would be called the secondary source. So any kind of way that the source you're reading has used another's material, that counts as a secondary source. So here, there's another rule. The Marshall source, the secondary source, does not appear in the reference list either. So only Cook is going to appear in the reference list because the reference list only includes sources that you have read. So if you didn't read the secondary source, you wouldn't put it in your reference list either. When you're putting multiple sources into the same parenthetical citation, here's what that will look like. You'll list them alphabetically or as they appear in the reference list, so not chronologically. You're not going to list them by the year they were published. You're going to go ahead and list them by the alphabetical order of the last names. So they should appear essentially exactly how they are in the reference list for ease of finding them. Jacqueline wants to know, Marshall is the book reading from. No, so in the secondary source material, you are reading Cook, and Cook has cited Marshall. So Marshall is the secondary source cited in your primary source, Cook. And then attributing to multiple sources, if you bring those authors' names in line, you use the same pattern that we used for pulling one author or two authors or three authors in line, just all together with commas separating each one. So here you can see I've pulled Patterson, Sampson, and Zilk out of the parentheses, but I've left the years, and now I keep commas in between them to designate that they're different sources. This is uncommon. You probably won't use this very much, but if you do, you can see that the main change is keep the year always in parentheses, pull the author's names in line, and change from semicolons in the parenthetical citation to commas in the list in line. Another uncommon source that you might have to deal with is multiple sources with the same author and year. Sometimes authors are very diligent and they publish multiple things in the same year. For example, Marshall might have published 2 things in 2018, or maybe even 3. Now what I have to do is I have to designate by letter which sources came first. So for example, Marshall 2018A is published in January, while Marshall 2018B is published later in the year, maybe June, and Marshall 2018C would be published even later than B, so sometime after June. Jacqueline, I see your question. Can I explain attributing assertion one more time, please? So are you asking me for the inline or the parenthetical or both? Okay, no problem. Yeah, when we're attributing something to multiple sources, this might be something like we want to prove that children with ADHD do better at a certain bedtime. And I have 3 sources that prove that. So if I make the claim that children with ADHD do better if they have a consistent bedtime every evening, and I've read it in 3 sources, then I can create this single parenthetical citation at the end of that sentence. And I would separate each of the sources with semicolons. So all 3 of these, Patterson 2004, Sampson 2005, and Zilk 2001, will say the same thing. They'll have the same main claim that I can use to support my claim. I'll separate each of those individual citations using a semicolon in the parentheses so that the reader knows these are separate sources. And if I pull them in line, I only pull the last names. So I'll leave the years in parenthetical remarks following the author, Patterson, parentheses 2014, or 2004, sorry. And then I will separate them in the sentence by commas. So I could say Patterson, Sampson, and Zilk all claim that children with ADHD do better with a consistent bedtime. So that's how that kind of citation would be used. No problem. So mentioning multiple sources with the same author and year again, as you pull those parenthetical citations in line, it follows the same kind of pattern you can see that attributing to multiple sources did. So I'm only going to take the last name, Marshall 2018A, and I remove the comma between Marshall and the year. but I always keep the year in parentheses. So you can see that a theme of the different kinds of citations we've looked at is the year never leaves the parentheses. So the year should always be contained in a parenthetical citation following the author if the author's name is used in the sentence. In the reference list, those letters, the A, B, and C following the year, also have to be included so that your reader knows, essentially like breadcrumbs, how to find that citation. So if they're only interested in Marshall 2018 B, they need to know which one in your reference list that is. So if you put the B in the parentheses, it also has to be included in the reference list. So before we move on to how and when to cite, I'll show you where you can find the same information that we just reviewed on the Writing Center's website, which is a really friendly way of reviewing citations when you're writing a paper on both your desktop and mobile device. So here you'll see this is the landing page, and you'll be able to find APA right here with the colored manual. Use our interactive APA tools. If you click on it, it'll take you directly to our web guide for how to handle APA 7. So here you have options. You have the APA transition guide that essentially summarizes all of the information I'm providing you with this evening and from our other webinars this week. You have a quick link to how to cite things in text, a quick link to how to cite things in your reference list, and a quick link to formatting. Information on numbers will be added shortly. So here we just reviewed in-text citations, so I'm going to take you there. It's going to keep you on the same page. So if you scroll up, you'll see that we're on the same page. It's taking you right down the page. And here we have an interactive citation tool. So what this will do is you can click on what you need to cite, and it will tell you to the right how to format that with the template and an example. So this is a very quick and easy way. It works the same way on your phone if you need to quickly figure it out, how to cite any kind of in-text citation. So you can see these are the same things that we just reviewed, maybe even a little more, like how to handle missing info and how to handle quotations as well. So anytime that you need to figure out how to cite something, you can simply come here to the APA page, and there's even a direct link to this citation tool. So if you look at the top of the page here and you add the remaining information to the web address, you'll be able to go ahead and come directly to this citation tool each time. So bookmarking this can be really helpful while you're writing your work. So I'll show you more on this page as we go, but we're going to go back to the presentation now and look at, I have one question. A prolific author, where multiple sources, same author, different years, for instance, Sinatra 2018, 2019, and 2020, let's say 2 times in 2020. That's a really good question, George. So with a prolific author, if you want to cite the author of multiple years in the same sentence, I'm going to write it in the chat box for you so you can all see it. And what it's going to look like is this. You're going to have the author's last name and the relevant years that you are citing. So if you look at the chat box, it looks something like that. So you'd have Sinatra and then commas listing all of those years. The commas indicate to your reader that all of those publications are the same author. When you get to the reference list, you'll have to have an individual reference for each of those sources though. So you won't be able to have a singular citation for each of the sources. Basically, you're going to use commas to indicate to the reader they're the same, where semicolons in the parenthetical remark would show the reader that they're not the same. The commas are what shows that. Does that answer your question, George? Great. Okay, Sydney, I see you also have a question. Going back to the quote example, why was the citation gray para 4 instead of page number? So that is for something where there are not page numbers indicated. So we'll look at that a little bit more in depth in a couple of later slides. But essentially, if there's no page number, you have to go by paragraph number, which can be somewhat frustrating, but it really, really helps your reader to find the exact information that you cited. So what you'll have to do is, like, for example, on a web page, you'd have to count the paragraphs and then say para and the number for the number of the paragraph that the information you took was in. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Jacqueline, no periods. Yeah, there are no periods inside of these citations unless you have et al. The only period you're going to have in a citation is going to be following the all in et al. So let's take a little look at how and when to cite within a paragraph. This can be the trickiest part, right? You never know if it's too much or too little. So a guideline, cite only works that you have read and ideas that you have incorporated into your writing. So this is sort of an honesty pledge. You should not cite things you haven't read. 1, because it's dishonest, and 2, because you don't know for sure, because you haven't read it, if the entire source agrees with you. There are many sources that, while the abstract might indicate that it agrees with you, the methods section or the limitations section will show that, in fact, it might even prove the opposite of what the abstract is leading you to believe without all of the information. So be super careful to only cite works that you have actually read and ideas that you've incorporated into your writing. Every source you cite within the paper has to appear on the reference list, and vice versa. You can't put anything in the reference list that you didn't cite in text. As I mentioned, only cite sources you've actually read. And like we talked about earlier, if you use a secondary source, make sure you do it sparingly, because that indicates to the reader already that you didn't necessarily read that source. So looking at how and when to cite within a paragraph, you have to avoid a couple of things. The first being under citation. If you don't cite enough, you lead your reader on to believe that the material is your own. This is problematic for multiple reasons. One being you're not crediting the original author, which is what constitutes plagiarism. But another being you're not really proving your own argument without citations. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You want to be sure that you're citing so that you're crediting the original author, but you also need to be citing to validate your opinion as the author of your paper. So under citation can cause problems for both plagiarism and your argument. But over citation can be its own problem because it can be distracting. So what can we do? How can we find the just right? Let's take a look at some examples. Here's what too little looks like. If you write a whole paragraph that uses information from a source, but you only include the citation at the end of the paragraph when there's been no other prior citation in the paragraph, this is potentially going to be flagged for plagiarism. That's because if you've introduced source material throughout the entirety of this paragraph, but you've only included the citation at the end, technically, only the last sentence is indicated to the reader as having come from this source. Without a citation right after the source material is first introduced, the reader has no way to indicate here, okay, where is the writer's idea and where is the source ideas? This is problematic for both your plagiarism and argument issues. Without a citation throughout this paragraph, there's also no proof that any of these claims are true or factual within the consensus of scholarship. So not only does this raise plagiarism issues with a singular citation here at the end, it also won't pass graduate academic writing expectations because we're required to prove our point by finding other authors who have used scholarly peer-reviewed ways to prove the same thing. But there can also be too much. A citation in every single sentence is not quite necessary. So the citation is required after the first paraphrased idea. And the citation that follows, an inline one right after, is okay because it demonstrates to the reader that you're now going to summarize and paraphrase ideas throughout. But if you keep mentioning the writer, it's a bit redundant because we have not changed sources, so we don't need to continue to reference the writer parenthetically at the end of sentences like this. Those first two are what you want to sort of aim for in terms of summarizing a single source. You want to use both a parenthetical and an inline source if you're going to continue to speak about the same source throughout a paragraph. You can switch them around. You can introduce them inline first and parenthetical second, but you want to be sure that you're introducing the citation the very first time you use information from the source. That's the most important principle. Then after, you can use a citation sparingly throughout the paragraph as long as you're indicating to the reader that you are summarizing the work of someone else. So you might want to know, how can I show someone that? So I'm going to go ahead actually to the next slide to show you. You can show people that you are still reviewing the same source by using signal phrases. So here, by saying in addition and by completing this task, I'm referring back to the prior information and indicating that the new sentences relate to the same idea I've been speaking about. This is what really helps the reader to understand that the information is coming from the same source. With these signal phrases, you're being very clear that you're using the ideas from the article that you read throughout the entire paragraph, because there's continuity with these essentially addition signs for words. Transitions act as the multiplication or addition or divisional signs that we use in math in our sentences. So as long as you're including those, you're able to avoid plagiarism concerns because you're continuing to refer back to the sources that you properly introduced using your language. So we'll go here now and take a look at what just right looks like. Here's an example of a paragraph that properly cites a source that it's summarizing. The first citation is correct. It's added the very first time I use an idea from a source that is not my own idea. Then the next citation, where I pull the author's names in line, provides indication to the reader that I'm going to continue to speak about the same source and build out the paragraph based on that source. It's important to note that because this is your first inline citation, pulling the author's names into the sentence, you have to include that parenthetical year. Afterwards, if you want to refer to Duke and Beck throughout the paragraph, you could just use their names now, because now you've had both the parenthetical citation and the inline citation using the year. Now you're free to use Duke and Beck in your sentences to refer back to the source without the year. No additional citation is needed though, because it's clear that the information is still being paraphrased using those signal phrases. I see I have a question. For the second reference, why can't you just say the authors noted? Melissa, you can. So after the second reference, you see where it says Duke and Beck in line, you can say the authors noted after that. That's a signal phrase. What you can't do is say the authors noted following a parenthetical phrase. This is because the authors weren't actually mentioned in the sentence, so it's not clear what authors I'm talking about. Especially, for example, if the source was talking about authors. If the source was speaking about authors and then I didn't mention the authors' names in line and I started talking about authors in the next sentence, you can see how there would be some confusion. So what you need to do is you need to use an inline citation using the author's names in the sentence before you can say things like the authors noted. But that's an excellent way of being sure that you're referring back to the source throughout your paragraph. That would be a very good signal phrase. Another question, how do you cite famous quotes when so many versions in many languages exist? Yes, that's a tough one, isn't it? You just pick one. If there's no original author's work that you can access, you just need to pick a source that you can cite and have your reader be able to access that quote somewhere. Now, I will say that something that can be very useful for finding an original is to use Google Scholar. If you use Google Scholar, you can often find an original citation or a citation that might be a bit older than a direct quoting web page that you found a quote on that can help you to find an actual date that you can use in an author. But this also raises the question of what sources should we use in our writing? APA wants us to use primarily scholarly sources, which means sources that are written by experts in the field of the topic we're discussing, peer-reviewed articles for the most part, or web pages that are published by peer-reviewed and supported organizations. So we want to be careful when we're citing a source that seems tricky to cite. This is usually an indication that maybe it doesn't belong in our paper. But if we have to cite something that's like a proverb or something that's a traditional expression in many languages, we'll have to identify a singular web page or a book or a literature that we can use to cite it. Essentially, you can't put information that you take from somewhere else in your paper without citing it. So wherever you saw it, you have to credit it. Okay, if there are more questions on that, please do feel free to keep asking. So like we looked at before, signal phrases are very important. Citation formatting with page numbers. So here is what we were discussing earlier when we were discussing why we used para instead of a P, period, and the number. If you cite a direct quote, you need to cite the page or paragraph number on which the quote appeared in the original source. This is like a breadcrumb for your reader. Essentially, your reader needs to be able to check that your source says what you said it said. Think about when you do your literature reviews and how useful it is that the authors provide you with the information to other sources on the same topics so that you can write a literature review. This kind of academic scholarly behavior is what creates consensus amongst the field. Sharing information like page numbers in our citations is really helpful for other writers who might want to use the same idea, build off our ideas, or just double check a little bit more about the topic that you've shared. So it's more than just crediting the original author, it's creating a scholarly community that shares and helps each other build arguments. So here's what that looks like. If there's a page number, it looks like P, period, and the number it appeared. If what you need to use spans multiple pages, use multiple P's to indicate that. So PP dot, and then the two first and last pages of the material that you covered. If there's no page numbers, you're required to use a paragraph number. So here, para dot 4. Like we looked at on the website, if you need help remembering how to quote things, you can find that material in the in-text citation tool. It'll help you remember how to cite the page numbers. There's a question. Does APA actively discourage self-citations? Some students have published before and are recognized by Google Scholar. You're correct, that's true. No, APA does not discourage self-citations. In fact, a very strange form of plagiarism is where you use material from a previous work that's your own and you don't cite it. Because you didn't create that material for the present paper that you're writing, it's deemed dishonest to use that information without citing your previous work. So APA actually actively encourages self-citations. You will want to go ahead and cite your work, especially if it's something that you've worked so diligently on that it's been published and recognized by a different database. That's something you want to cite for sure. You'll see a lot in the articles that you read, the authors who publish the article cite themselves within their article. This is a great way of building up a body of scholarly work that shows your presence as an author in the field. So as you go on in academia, that's actually something that will become more and more common as you pursue research on the same topic and you publish more and more things on that topic. So yes, do cite yourself if you use your own material. Okay, so moving on here, I'm going to show you where you can find more information on formatting quotations and page numbers. So if we go back to our website, here we can go back to the top and click formatting, and formatting will take us down to another interactive tool that will help us out. So we can look at quotations here and how to handle them. including where the page numbers go. So if you need more help with integrating source materials into your papers as you write them, you can also find information on paragraph and page numbers in the quotation section of the APA formatting tool. So there's a little bit of information kind of spread around everywhere. Okay, moving back to our presentation. Citation formatting. Two authors, same name. This is a strange one, right? But it can happen, especially, for example, something like Smith, right? So if you have two authors where the first authors have the same surname, you're going to do something like this. You're going to use the initials. So this goes back to that question we had of, is there any other reason to use initials? There is if you can't distinguish the authors, right? So here I have two Valentics, and it would be kind of difficult to distinguish them if I didn't use the initials. So you can go ahead and use initials if you have to, because there are multiple authors with the same last name. This really doesn't appear that often, so don't stress out about it too much. But if you need to know how to do it, you can always find this information on our website in that interactive citation tool. So forming a block quote. We just looked on the website of where you can find the information on how to cite those quotes while you're writing your paper. We'll review it here as well. If you cite something and directly quote it and use more than 40 words, you have to set it off in a block. So how this looks is that you indent the entire quote, 1 tab or ½ inch on the left margin only. So the entire quote will start ½ inch in. It won't touch the left at all. You'll also have a closing punctuation mark before the citation. This is uncommon, right? Because typically our APA in-text citations are contained inside the sentence that they apply to. However, I've cited lots of sentences here, so obviously that's not going to work for my block quote. So for a block quote, you're going to take that parenthetical citation, and in a unique situation, you're going to pull it on the outside of the final punctuation. So I have the period, and then the citation, and no period after the citation. And then if the following text is part of the same paragraph, like you're embedding a quote inside a paragraph, you're going to keep it aligned to the left as if the paragraph just kept going. So only the block quote is going to be set off to the side like this. Questions on citation formatting? Okay, I'm going to review those here. How do you treat foreign names in citations when they contain unusual symbols? You copy them. So you want to have it be exactly the way that it shows up in the source. When you copy and paste those foreign symbols in, it can be frustrating and difficult, but what you'll do is when you paste it in, there are 3 options when you paste something in Microsoft Word. There is use the format on the website that you got it from, use the format of your document, or merge format. If you merge the format, when you go ahead and use that foreign name, it'll use the same font that you've been using but contain the unusual symbols. This is important to make sure that you're giving the original author the correct credit, Now what you can also do is you can use a citation manager inside of Microsoft Word to create the citation correctly one time and then to insert it throughout. So if you'll hang on through the end of the presentation, I'll show you how to do that so that you can only have to do the work once, and then you'll be able to apply the same citation all the way through. The next question, are we going to have to access this presentation later, and where would we find it? If you need to access the presentation later, it's going to be emailed to you. All of this material is also on that website that I've shared with you. So at any time, you can either listen to the recording or you can just have the information that you can utilize on the website page. How do we update our references for our dissertations to the new APA 7 format? Great question, Kimberly. I'm about to move into that part right now. Okay, so let's go into that. Let's go into references. There's a couple of changes, and I recognize that I'm getting, towards the end of time, so I'll try to be a little bit quicker and then also show you where you can get information after this at an easy way. Okay, so reference formats of books. Here's some main changes. No longer do you need to use the location before the publishing house. So what that means is if your source was published in New York by Sage, you're only going to say Sage. So we no longer have to deal with that location that comes before the publishing house. Otherwise, everything in your book citations is going to stay the same. Just remove the location. For journal articles, a slight change. The issue number is always required. So if there's an issue number, it has to be added. It can't be left out. Likewise, the DOI link is now always required. So when you access journal articles off of the website, you can always find the link to the article on the page where you took it from the website. You'll have to include that now at the end. This might look like this HTTP, or it could look like the DOI number. You need to include it at the end of every source that you've accessed to be sure that your reader can access the source. This is not the link from the library database. So when you search for information and sources through the database, don't use the link from the library. You have to use the link from the source itself. If you use the link from the library, someone who doesn't belong to TCS cannot view the source. So it's important, like if your journal article is written in Springer, find the Springer link, which you can find easily by just opening the article outside of the library's database. DOI links are not supposed to be hot linked, correct? Yeah, no hyperlinks. You don't need the hyperlink. This is important because when you hyperlink it and you start clicking through or trying to format your references, it's really difficult to format them all with the hanging indents and everything. So you don't need the hot link. Another question, if you're using a very old journal article that you did not obtain online. Well, this is, yes, if you have no way of providing a web link, of course, you wouldn't use one. The rule simply stands that if there is one now, you must include it. The age of digital access and all of this. So if there isn't one, that's okay. You don't have to add it. If there is one though, you have to add it. Another question, what if you read the physical journal? You didn't read it off the internet. Well, Christine, if the physical journal has a digital presence, you have to use the digital citation. The premise here that APA is trying to create is open access information. So they're trying to make it very easy for everyone to look at the same research, creating a really great scholarly community that can build off of each other and create findings faster. So you're doing a little bit of work to make sure that other authors can access the same material, which will be really useful for you too when you read different articles and you can access their sources very quickly as well. You need to go back to all of your articles to include the DOI. Yes, Mary, I'm sorry, you do have to do that. Now, I will tell you this. If you use Google Scholar to find them, it's much faster. So if you type in the name of your article into Google Scholar, it'll be very quick that you can find those DOIs. Google Scholar has already updated to APA 7 in its entirety, so it's able to help you get all the information much faster. Another question, why would APA now require the address? So the DOI is not a web address. Technically, even though it says HTTP, the DOI is a permalink to the article. It's a little bit different. So if you're going to cite, for example, a newspaper's HTTP address, we're going to see in a minute how there's a little bit of extra information you're going to provide because you're right. The addresses do change and they're not stable. But DOIs don't change. That's the purpose of having them. Okay, so moving forward with multiple authors, now instead of including only 7, you include up to 20. Like I said, Google Scholar has already updated this. So you can go ahead if you need to redo a citation where you only had 7 out of the lot of authors that were publishing the article, and you can find the other authors pretty quick. But you'll have to include all of them up to 20. If there's more than 20, like 21, you need to use an ellipses here before the last author to indicate that there were more than the 20. This would be a very strange case, but it might happen. Okay. Organizations and websites. This will get to your question about how to make sure that the link is clear. For organizations and websites, you need to include as an exact a date as you can. So if you're going to cite a web page, because as we've noted, the web links may change, you need to cite the publication date as close to the actual day that it was created as possible. This will help the reader to find the source in case the link is no longer stable. So for example, if your article was published on January 6th, don't just include the 2020, put a comma and include January 6th as well. You don't need the retrieved from label though. So APA has removed that from all citations. You don't have to say retrieved from before any of the URLs anymore. You just put the URL in like so. And don't put a period after the URL because it can change how accessible it is to the reader. So just the URL by itself, no period final. For audiovisual works, they're going to look something like this. If you cite a film, you cite the movie title in italics the way you'd cite a book title. Oops, sorry. And if you're going to cite a video like a TED Talk or something like that, you're also going to provide the web link. Essentially, the rule of thumb is going to be if there's an internet version of the source, you need to go ahead and use that to share with your readers so that they can quickly access it. So here I've got the title of the talk in italics. I have a square bracket indication of what it was. It was a video, so it wasn't an audio file, for example. Then I have the publisher, TED Conferences, and the URL. The difference here is we're not using retrieved from links, and we're providing a little more information on how recently it was published, like January 2020, for example. So a recap on APA 7 changes. For print books, don't include the location. So if you're revising your dissertation, go ahead and go through and remove all locations. For periodicals, always include the DOI, okay, if you can. Like we mentioned, sure, there might be some chances where you have a print article or an older article that doesn't have it. APA certainly does not expect you to make up something that you don't have. Always include the issue number, and don't use the phrase retrieved from. When the author and publisher site name are the same, omit the publisher site name from the reference. So here you can see APA published the APA manual, right? So that you don't have to say again APA at the end of the citation. You can say American Psychological Association and use the abbreviation author at the end instead. So if you find yourself repeating the same information twice, APA does not require this anymore. You can just say author so they know it refers back to the author. And include all authors up to 20. I see I have several questions as I just wanted to finish recapping the slide. Okay. Since so many addresses are unstable, is there a need to indicate where the material was retrieved from? So if we look back at that slide, I'll go back real quick. So you see here in the first one where it has the publisher CNN shared with the reader. So you've got the author, the title, and CNN follows the title of the source. That lets the reader know where it came from. So that will take care of that issue that we were just referring to about how will the reader find the material if the link is no longer stable, because you added the publisher. That's how. Okay, a couple more slides. So let me add that. Sentence case. What this means is you use sentence case for all source titles in your reference citations. So you're not going to capitalize every word in a title. What you'll do is you'll capitalize only the first word of the source title, Any proper nouns, of course, should be capitalized, and the first word of a subtitle, because it's technically a second title. So it looks something like this. I only have to capitalize that first letter in best and the letter that starts the subtitle, no. So if your titles in your reference list use title case, which is all capitalized, we'll need to reduce it to just sentence case capitalization. It's okay, Carrie. If you missed it, how many authors have to be named? It's two different things. So in your in-text citation inside of your actual written paper, you only use one, two, or at all. So you're going to say the names of one author citation, two author citation, and then once you get to three authors or more, you start using it all right away. In your reference entry, you're going to list up to 20 authors in the entry that comes at the end of the entire paper. Okay, so next week we'll have more information on things like style in APA, how to use pronouns, hyphenation, capitalization, italics, quotation marks, verb tense, point of view, numbers, and so on, and formatting, like running heads, title pages, header levels, fonts and spacing, tables and figures. However, if you don't want to wait for the webinar, all of this information is accessible on our website. So I'll take these last few minutes that I have here to share that with you. If you have any questions about anything, please go ahead and file them in as we look at this other materials. I want to share with you where you can find information on formatting. So if you're trying to do the formatting of your paper now and you want to make changes, there are two things you can look at on the APA web guide that we've created for you. If you go to the very top, the first thing you can do is look at the transition guide. This will explain to you all the ways you need to change your paper or your dissertation from 6 to 7. So here are the top 10 changes, i.e. the most prevalent ones you need to learn right now of how to reformat how you do APA. So it explains what it used to look like, it explains how you can make the change, and gives an example. And there's several pages here that will help you with that. Question? Melissa, if you're on Google Scholar, you have to open up the link. So when you search through the articles, click on the article you're trying to cite the DOI for, and when the page opens with the article on the page, like say it opens to Springer or Sage or JustStore or something like that, then you'll be able to see the DOI, because that's technically where it's at. It's on that page from the journal itself. So Google Scholar is like an aggregate of the sources, and it'll take you exactly to the page that you can find the DOI on. So you'll have to go through into the page that hosts the article you're looking for. Is there a guide on how to use the citation tool in Word? Yes, there is. So let me show you that as well as a part of what I wanted to show you here. So if you want to learn how to use the citation tool, come into Learning Tools, and we have this nifty new time management guide. What you can do here is you can learn how to save time on all of these changes. So you can go into saving time on sources, and it should take you down to step 3, where you can learn how to cite your sources quickly, and then also how to use the tools, like the library tools, and how to use Google Scholar, like I just discussed, to find the sources, and how to use MS Word Researcher to find sources, and the Citation Manager to cite sources. So here you can use these two to learn how to use MS Word Citation Manager. In a dissertation, especially with things that have special characters and things like that, this can be a lifesaver for making sure that once you get the citation right the first time, you can continue to do it. Looking at these guides, these numbered pictures are actually interactive GIFs. So you can click on them and they'll share with you information on each of the steps you need to take. So it kind of looks at first like there's not enough information, but make sure you click through the numbers and they explain how to go ahead and use those programs. I know you asked about the citation manager only, but researcher is also very excellent. If you're trying to find new sources for material, like you got a remark back, for example, that you want more synthesis in a paragraph, you need another source. Researcher is a great way of finding that extra source for that topic. So this is a good thing to use for time saving. I want to go back real quick to the APA page though. If you need to format materials right now, click on formatting here. And formatting will take you down the same page because all of the APA materials are available on the same page. And it'll teach you how to do it in APA. So it reviews for you the spacing changes, quotation changes, how to use italics, and then provides examples of the changes in the cover page, the headings, table formatting, figure formatting, hanging indents, and so on. So again, like I said, these are all interactive. So when you go through this, you're going to click on these and it explains how to do it. So after you click on each of the numbers, it'll show you exactly which of the myriad of buttons there are to find that exact setting that you need to do APA 7 formatting. Jacqueline, there isn't an APA generator on this site. We have a template. So in formatting here, you can download the pre-formatted APA paper. So that's under APA formatting on the APA guide. The reason we don't have a citation generator where you plug in the materials is because those algorithms are not correct for the APA 7 formatting or for all of the elements that are required in a source. So we don't advise using things like Cite This For Me or EasyBib because they leave out information that APA actually requires in a citation. So while when you use our citation tool up here, it's not going to tell you, for example, what, plug in and generate the citation for you. It'll show you how to do it. And then after you do it the one time, you can just integrate it throughout. I also wanted to show that we have the same thing for references. So not a plug and go citation tool, but it is a tool that will show you how to format and then examples of every single citation you might need very quickly. I would argue that this is possibly even better than Cite For Me because Cite For Me doesn't show you in advance what it's supposed to look like. So this is a great way of making sure. John, the citation generator from the library, to be completely frank, I am not certain if it's updated all the way to APA 7. I know that they were in the process of doing so. So what I would say is that most of the APA 7 changes are removing information. So you might have to check at the generated citation, see if it has too much like the publishing location that's not needed anymore and remove it yourself. But you can also go ahead and check here and see if it matches what an APA citation for a book chapter needs to cite. Darlene, I see you say cite fast is pretty good. It is for general things, but when you start citing things like a book chapter or a media page, for example, it doesn't have all the elements that you need to have a passing APA citation. So they give you the shell of the citation, but they're missing elements and italicization that is necessary to get full marks on your APA. So be super careful with those algorithms because they won't pre-format all of the information in the more complicated citations. Kimberly, if your dissertation has been sent to the IRB, do you need to change it to APA 7? This is something to discuss with your chair. So at different stages of the dissertation process, there are allowances right now for keeping APA 6. So if you're in defense, it's going to copy editing, it's being published, you're not being asked to change to APA 7. However, if you're in the proposal stage or you're still writing and you're still revising, APA 7 is expected in your completed dissertation. But don't stress out too much about that because the Writing Center is happy to help you transition. So what we'll do if you need assistance and this is something that is causing a mass amount of stress, send us a chapter. We'll show you where things need to be changed, show you that it's probably not as much as you think, and then give you information like I'm showing you right now of how to quickly and effectively get it done. It really is almost easier to use 7 because you have to use less information than you needed to use for 6. All those long in-text citations are short now. Yeah, Jacqueline, these do apply for PowerPoint. So anytime you're writing anything in APA style, these rules are followed to a T. Thank you for pointing that out, Eva, that the APA sample paper seems to link to a general web page. I'm sure you all have noticed that the community site has been updated, and now it's more or less common that it links to the main page on some web links. I will go ahead right now after the close of this presentation and update that link so that the sample paper is linked there. When we transition to the new website and community gateway that everyone is using now, all of the old hyperlinks became invalid. So you're going to experience several times that it just links to the main page. Best thing you can do, since we're still finding out where those links have gone, is let us know like this and we'll make sure. And if you're really stressed, Melissa, about making sure that the document is taken care of, we can schedule a one-on-one and figure it out. You can find, I'll show you here on our homepage, the link to scheduling a one-on-one writing review. So here on the first box, you'll be able to go through to the scheduling system and get that scheduled. Here, like I mentioned, you're also able to go ahead and view our past webinars, including this one, right next to scheduling and the APA tutorials. And down here, here's all of our menu of writing services. So you can go through the different tools that we have and find guides throughout the website on those specific issues. Is there anything else I can show you or help you out with as we embark on this grand journey? So in terms of campus for writing reviews, anyone from any campus can use the guides I've shown you on this website. For writing reviews, you need to access the schedule for your specific campus and your writing specialist at that campus. So you're able to schedule a meeting with, yes, any campus can have a meeting, but you have to specifically schedule with your campus. Tips and tricks for getting word count without headers citations for a course paper with a limit. Oh, a teacher that requires a limit. So for Microsoft Word word count, you can choose to eliminate things from the word count in the actual settings bar. So what you can do is you can do two things. You can control all the section that you want to find out about, and you can click on the checkboxes for exclude certain information, like exclude footers or exclude headers. Now, the problem is if you're talking about headers like APA heading levels or citations like parenthetical citations, believe it or not, those are actually going to count in your word count. So your word count isn't going to remove those. Any word, even if it's the author's last name, is going to count towards your word count. So you can't actually remove those. And Melissa, the transition webinar tomorrow. Yes, there is a transition webinar tomorrow. And all of the webinars will be made available right here on this View a Webinar page. So at this time, what I'll do is I'll leave our webinar open if you want to peruse some things and have any questions answered. But if you don't have questions, feel free to sign off and access these materials at any point. Like I mentioned, go ahead and go for that one-on-one writing review if you're feeling stressed about it, or go through the interactive tools and see if it doesn't make the information a little bit more clear. But if it doesn't, you know, you can reach out to us by email at any point. It's right here at the bottom of the website, Contact the Online Writing Center. And we're happy to answer questions via email. You don't need to schedule an appointment for that. So if you have any questions, don't feel like you have to wait to have a total draft to send us. Just go ahead and shoot us the question and we'll get you the resources that you need. I'm very glad to see that it was helpful. If you need any assistance on these materials, feel free to reach out. Have a great night.